Addiction is often seen as chaos, an unraveling of will, a betrayal of one's values, a descent into false pleasure and self abandonment. Addiction is punished, pathologized, and feared. Yet beneath this surface, there lies a hidden harmony waiting to be uncovered, not in the behavior itself, but in the message it carries. You see, every addiction is a distorted prayer, an attempt to feel whole, to feel safe, to feel alive. It is the body and brain reaching for relief in the only language they've been taught, even if that language leads to suffering. When seen through the lens of harmony, addiction is not the enemy of awakening, but a crude and painful doorway to it. It reveals, with unrelenting honesty, where the soul has been split from itself, where the nervous system has been trained to chase shadows instead of light. To uncover the hidden harmony within addiction is not to romanticize it, but to meet it with understanding, to listen instead of shame, to observe instead of condemn. It is in observing with clarity that we see the addict is not weak, but searching, not cursed, but conditioned. And what they seek through the addiction, peace, transcendence, belonging, has never been lost, only forgotten beneath layers of noise. Harmony, in this light, is not found by avoiding the wound, but by understanding it. Addiction becomes a mirror, reflecting back the truth that healing is not a war, but a reunion. The substance, the screen, the craving, they all point back to the same truth. Something within longs to return to wholeness. And that longing, when listened to, becomes sacred. Section 1. The core misunderstanding. When the brain reacts without clarity. The human brain is a masterpiece of pattern recognition, survival optimization, and rapid adaptation. Yet within its brilliance lies a flaw born not of malice, but of misunderstanding. This flaw is the unconscious fusion of reaction and meaning. At the center of this flaw is the amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure deep within the limbic system. The amygdala is often described as the brain's emotional alarm system, quick to interpret threats and initiate rapid behavioral responses. But it does not possess language. It doesn't pause to evaluate. Its power lies in its speed and intensity, not in its discernment. And herein lies the beginning of misinterpretation. Modern humans are constantly flooded with stimuli, social media, information, interpersonal micro-interactions, and internal self-dialogue. Each stimulus activates a neural resonance based on prior emotional memory, and the amygdala, in its protective urgency, often interprets newness or uncertainty, ambiguity, as danger. Thoughts that may have simply been fragments, reflections, or neutral data become colored by emotional alarm. A message left unread becomes a signal of rejection. A pause in someone's tone becomes disrespect. A moment of fatigue becomes failure. Not because it is, but because the brain has reacted. This raw reaction, mistaken for truth, is where psychological doom scrolling begins. Not necessarily on a screen, but in the theater of the mind. The default mode network, DMN, a system associated with internal thought, storytelling, and self-reference, grabs onto the emotionally charged interpretation and loops it. The story grows legs. They don't respect me. I'm falling behind. I can't handle this. The narrative becomes a trap. Not because it was true, but because the brain reacted without clarity, and the observer believed it. Yet at the core of every reaction is information, not identity. The emotion is not a verdict. It is an invitation. The body's tension is not punishment. It is a signal. But to decode these without being consumed by them, one must awaken the observer, the ever-present awareness that sees the brainstorm but does not become it. Modern society conditions individuals to mistake the mind's reactivity for the soul's truth. The rush of cortisol, the quickening heartbeat, the spiraling thought, all are mistaken for indicators of reality, when in fact they are echoes of prior experiences improperly labeled. This is not a human failing. It is a consequence of the speed of modern life colliding with the slowness required for truth. Thus, the step forward toward harmony is not to stop the reaction, but to recontextualize it, to see the amygdala's fire not as the enemy, but as a misdirected friend, to view doom scrolling not as a sign of weakness, but as a sign that the brain is craving alignment and direction. The reaction, once feared, reveals a hidden harmony. The loop, once inescapable, becomes a portal back to alignment. In this light, addiction, mental spirals, and even social anxiety are no longer conditions to be eradicated, but misfired attempts at self-regulation. The brain trying to protect a being who has not yet remembered how to truly listen. Section 2. Addiction as a feedback loop seeking harmony. Addiction is often framed as a pursuit of pleasure. But this framing misses the deeper, more nuanced reality. Addiction at its root is not a desire for excess. It is a hidden striving for harmony, misdirected only in its method, not its motive. It is the brain's desperate reach for harmony when natural alignment has been lost. The human nervous system is a dynamic instrument of feedback. Every moment it is scanning for coherence between internal state and external reality. When life is filled with meaningful relationships, movement, purpose, and connection, the brain's reward systems function as they were evolved to, reinforcing engagement with the world in sustainable cycles. But when natural meaning is disrupted through disconnection, trauma, or confusion, the brain doesn't go silent. It searches, it adapts. In this search, it can mistake artificial signals for real ones. Social media, pornography, junk food, compulsive entertainment, these are not inherently powerful. They are powerful only because they stimulate the emotional reward of something deeper. Belonging, novelty, love, risk, safety, connection. Each time one scrolls through a feed or lights up a dopamine spike with external stimulation, the brain registers a counterfeit echo of harmony, a fleeting resonance that never resolves. But because the source is hollow, the feedback loop never completes. The self does not stabilize, so it returns again and again, trying to close a loop that cannot be closed through illusion. At the chemical level, dopamine is not the pleasure chemical as commonly misunderstood. It is better understood as the currency of attentional investment. It signals what matters, what deserves pursuit, repetition, and neural reinforcement. When a brain assigns dopamine to superficial stimuli, it is not celebrating, it is redirecting cognitive resources. Over time, this leads to a neural architecture that favors immediate stimulation over deep integration. Focus fractures, discipline wanes, and most tragically, the inner compass dulls, the ability to discern true meaning from false reward begins to erode. This is why addiction is best understood not as a moral failing, but as a misfire of orientation. The brain, in its brilliance, is trying to return the organism to a state of activation, relevance, and safety. The addict is not seeking a high. The addict is consciously or unconsciously trying to reconnect with a felt sense of wholeness that has been lost. This reframing offers a shift. Rather than pathologize the addictive cycle, we can recognize it as a feedback loop of misalignment, a natural system signaling that something essential is missing. The addiction becomes not the disease, but a distorted chord, an unresolved attempt to restore harmony between the self and reality. And when seen this way, the path to healing becomes not suppression, but reharmonization. To escape addiction, one must not fight the impulse, but realign the system. The same attentional mechanisms that once invested in false reward can be reinvested into breath, movement, silence, creation, service, and meaning. But This shift cannot occur while the observer remains lost in the reaction. It can only begin when awareness returns to its rightful seat as witness, as discerner, as gentle architect of alignment. Section 3. The observer's crucial role, witnessing without identity. In the theater of the human mind, countless voices speak, some rooted in memory, others in fear, longing, impulse, or habit. Thoughts appear with urgency, emotions swell with command, and reactions unfold as if authored by necessity. But beneath this noise, there exists something far more stable: the observer. The observer is not a voice, but the space in which all voices are heard. It's not a reaction, but the awareness that sees reaction arise. It is the one function of the mind that does not seek control, yet from which all true control flows. Neuroscientifically, it corresponds not to a single structure, but to a state of integrative awareness, a synchronization between brain regions that allows for reflection rather than compulsion. This is the crucial turning point. When we identify with the thought, I am anxious, I need a hit, I can't focus, we merge identity with reaction. The limbic system, especially the amygdala, floods the system with urgency. Actions become entangled with emotional charge. But when we step back and witness the thought, there is anxiety here. There is a craving here. The mind is scattered. We create a fundamental and functional distance, a literal shift in neural dominance from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive function, long-term vision, and deliberate action. This is not metaphorical. It is measurable. Studies on mindfulness and metacognition reveal that individuals who practice non-judgmental observation of their mental states show increased activation in brain regions associated with regulation, choice, and resilience. The mere act of observing without collapsing into identity allows the nervous system to shift out of a reactive state and into one of adaptive clarity. This is why the observer is not merely a philosophical concept, it is the hinge of healing. Addiction, doom scrolling, compulsive reactivity all arise from unconscious identification. The thought says, "You need this." The emotion agrees. The body obeys. But when the observer steps in, there is a pause. And in that pause, freedom lives. The craving may remain, but it is no longer the author of your behavior. The emotion may swell, but it is no longer mistaken for truth. To cultivate this witnessing presence is not to disassociate from life. It is to return to the center of it. From here, one can meet every thought emotion, or urge not as a command, but as a signal. Not every signal must be obeyed. Many are outdated echoes of trauma, habit, or cultural programming. The observer allows us to listen without surrender, to feel without drowning, to choose without reflex. In this way, witnessing is not passive, it is the most active form of intelligence. It reclaims authorship over the self. It allows you to stand where reaction once stood. And from that still access, every addiction, every thought spiral, every misalignment becomes what it always was, an invitation to return. Section 4. Social media, the ultimate mirror of fragmented consciousness. Among the many compulsions of the modern age, none encapsulates the architecture of addiction quite like social media. It is not merely a pastime or a platform. It is a system of psychological engagement designed around the vulnerabilities of the fragmented mind. But to call it malicious is to misunderstand its nature. The algorithm is not a villain, it is a mirror. And what it reflects is not just what we like, but also what we lack. Social media hijacks perception of time, condensing hours into fleeting moments and convincing the brain that it is being productive, connected, or entertained. But the underlying mechanism is not satisfaction, it is anticipation. The dopamine response triggered by social media is less about enjoyment and more about seeking. Each scroll is a micro gamble, and each like a hit of affirmation that quickly fades. The result is not fullness, but chronic near reward, a loop that leaves the user suspended in perpetual expectation, neurologically unable to rest. More insidiously, social media warps the sense of self-worth. Identity becomes curated. Worth is equated with visibility. External validation replaces internal clarity. This transformation does not occur by force, but by subtle conditioning. What gains attention is repeated. What doesn't is abandoned. Over time, the user begins to outsource their sense of being to a system that cannot see them, only measure them. And yet, this system is not inherently evil. It simply reflects the mind that uses it. Algorithms optimize for engagement because human behavior has been conditioned to crave novelty over depth. In that way, social media reveals not just a technological flaw, but a psychological one. A society whose attention has been fractured by decades of overstimulation, trauma, distraction, and disconnection. What you are shown is not what is wrong with the world, but what has been made familiar to your neural circuits. Thus, social media addiction is not unique. It is the most crystallized expression of all addiction. The platform may differ, but the process is the same. A stimulus is used to fill an internal void to escape the discomfort of fragmentation. Whether the substance is nicotine, porn, weed, or likes on a screen, the pattern is identical: an impulse to resolve inner disharmony through external compensation. What makes social media particularly dangerous is its societal camouflage. It is accepted, it is everywhere. It is designed to feel like connection, even when it fosters isolation. This illusion deepens the fragmentation by convincing the user that their discontent lies in the content rather than in the pattern of engagement itself. But once the observer awakens, once one sees not just the feed, but the feeding, the spell begins to break. Social media can then be used with intention or even left behind altogether, not through force, but through relevance. When internal coherence is restored, the need for stimulation and simulation dissolves. In this way, social media is not just a trap, it is a teacher. It reveals where you have abandoned depth for distraction, wholeness for highlights, presence for performance, and if observed clearly, it can guide you back to what it mimics but cannot provide: authentic connection, meaningful expression, and peace. Section 5: The Unified Escape. Harmony through attuned awareness. The way out of addiction, be it to substances, platforms, or thought patterns, is not abstinence alone, nor is it discipline in isolation. It is a return to attuned awareness, where each moment becomes an opportunity not to suppress or obey a reactive signal, but to understand it. Attuned awareness is the ability to hold a stimulus without collapsing into it, witnessing its presence without becoming its consequence. This is not passive observation, but active reinterpretation. It requires a deliberate slowing down of the brain's automatic scripts, a reorientation of attention away from survival driven loops and toward meaningful alignment. To ground this process, we offer a model not of escape, but of reintegration. It is neither mind over matter nor surrender to impulse. It is the construction of a new language of self relationship. 1. Recognize. The first act is recognition, not of the thought as truth, but as a signal. Craving is not command. Urge is not obligation. Emotional discomfort is not proof of threat. Each of these internal experiences is a data point, often pointing to unmet needs, misaligned beliefs, or unintegrated memory. Instead of resisting or indulging, one must first see clarity. The moment a reaction is seen as neural activity rather than identity or reality is the moment agency returns. 2. Reframe. Once the reaction is recognized, the mind is offered a choice: collapse into the default story or reframe it from the seat of the observer. Reframing is not rebranding, it is not positive thinking, it is the deeper act of assigning new meaning. A craving can be seen not as lack, but as a messenger of misalignment. A doom-scrolling spiral can be seen not as decay, but as an alarm that the mind seeks coherence. An urge to escape can be seen not as weakness, but as the brain begging to come back to balance. This reframing dismantles fear, not by suppression, but by disarming illusion. 3. Resensitize. One of the quiet casualties of chronic stimulation is desensitization. The nervous system, once attuned to the subtle richness of natural life, is rewired to seek only the extreme. Healing, then, is not the numbing of highs and lows. It is relearning how to feel the real. Resensitization happens through presence. Sunlight on skin, breath in the chest, the rhythm of a walk, the color of a leaf, the depth of the song, the tension in a muscle, the silence in thought. These are not sentimental details. They are real data, the forgotten stimuli that regulate the nervous system and rebuild internal trust. The more the brain is nourished by true sensation, the less it demands artificial ones. 4. Re-engage. Once awareness is restored, meaning must follow. Life does not ask us merely to abstain from fragmentation, it asks us to return to our role within it. The final movement of this model is a reinvestment of energy, not into reaction, but into contribution. The mind that no longer chases temporary highs becomes capable of sustained vision. The body that no longer bristles in anxiety can now build, serve, speak, create, and love. Re-engagement is the act of offering oneself back to life, not as a wounded reactor, but as a harmonized participant. This return is not a finish line, but a state of rhythm. Attuned awareness is a practice, one that gently interrupts the illusion of separation and reestablishes the self as both seer and seen, both signal and soul. Section 6. Conclusion. Toward a more coherent inner civilization. Mental health has long been defined by the absence of pathology, an attempt to measure wellness by what is missing rather than what is truly present. But the next chapter of human understanding does not begin with the eradication of pain. It begins with the restoration of alignment, the profound resonance between stimulus and self, between impulse and meaning, between perception and truth. Addiction is not a weakness of will. It is not a moral failure or a defect to be purged. Addiction is a redirection of potential, a brilliant but misguided attempt to bring order to inner chaos. When seen through the lens of attuned awareness, every compulsive act, every craving, every spiral becomes raw material for transformation. The same intensity that once fed destruction becomes the energy that builds coherence. But this transmutation cannot be forced, it must be allowed. The central message is not to dominate the mind. The mind does not respond to conquest, it does not yield to shame. What it seeks is integration, a listener, not a warden. The thoughts that disturb us, the loops that trap us, the patterns we try to exile, none of these are errors. They are communications sent upstream from nervous systems still trying to make sense of a fragmented world. To live in harmony is not to silence the storm, but to hear it correctly. It is not to become judgmental, but to witness. It is to become fluent in the language of reactivity without mistaking it for truth. Not to escape, but to understand. It is through this silent witnessing that noise collapses into signal and confusion into coherence. This is the architecture of a new inner civilization, one where clarity is not the absence of thought, but the presence of wholeness, where healing is not the elimination of discomfort, but the redirection of attention toward what is true, natural, and alive within. And so the work begins, not in retreat, but in return, not in control, but in attuned awareness. For in the stillness behind the noise lies the truth that was never absent, only unheard. You are not broken, you are unfinished, and your healing is not elsewhere, it is in your attention, here, now.